The lights were so bright I could barely see the audience. You don't think about that when you're watching TV, how hot those studio lights are, how every blink feels like it's being recorded forever. The host smiled, perfect posture, earpiece glowing in the light. "We're here today with Daniel Harris," she said, "the self-made billionaire whose life story has inspired millions around the world." People clapped, cameras panned, my name echoed through the speakers. It still felt strange hearing it like that. Billionaire. She leaned in. "Daniel, your journey has become legendary. You went from sleeping in your car to leading one of the fastest growing tech companies in the world. Do you ever think about the people who left you when you had nothing?" I looked straight into the camera. There was a small red light above the lens. Steady, waiting. I knew exactly who might be watching on the other side. "Every day," I said. The studio went quiet. Even the host froze for half a second, unsure whether to push further. She smiled politely. "That's a very honest answer. Care to elaborate?" I nodded slowly. "Sure, but to explain that, I need to tell you where I came from and what it costs to be underestimated." I could see my reflection in the teleprompter. Gray in my hair now, lines around my eyes. Not the man she remembered, but somewhere out there, I knew Laura was watching. I pictured her sitting in a small apartment, the kind she used to call embarrassing, staring at the screen, realizing the man she once walked away from had built everything she said he never could. The host tilted her head. "Let's start at the beginning then. Who were you before all this?" I took a slow breath. "Before all this," I said, "I was just a broke husband trying to make something work. Let me tell you how I got there. 15 years earlier, I was standing in the parking lot of a gas station off Route 47. It was January, cold enough to make your breath look like smoke. I'd just finished a 12-hour shift, and my fingers were numb from handling fuel nozzles all day. I still had one more job to go, fixing computers in my garage. Not because I loved it, but because we were 3 months behind on rent, and the power company had already sent 2 warnings. When I walked through the door that night, Laura was sitting on the couch, scrolling her phone. "No, hi, no, how was your day?" Just a sigh. "You forgot to grab milk," she said. "I'll get it in the morning." "The morning's too late, Daniel. You forget everything lately." I dropped my bag by the door and rubbed my neck. "I've been working 2 jobs, Laura. I'm doing my best." She laughed softly, not kindly. Your best keeps us poor." That one stung. I looked at her, the woman I once thought I'd spend forever with, and for the first time, I didn't recognize her voice. She turned off the TV. "You promised me things would get better." "I'm trying," I said. "Trying doesn't pay bills." I didn't say anything after that, just sat there listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my dreams getting smaller. That was the night I realized love doesn't always die with a scream. Sometimes it dies with silence. A few weeks after that night, I started noticing how quiet our apartment had become. No music, no laughter, no more someday talk. Just bills on the counter and distance in her eyes. I'd come home late from the gas station, smell of fuel still on my jacket, and she'd already be asleep, or at least pretending to be. The only light in the room came from her phone. She'd scroll for hours, watching other people live the life she wanted. One morning, I woke up to find a sticky note on the fridge. The landlord called again. "Maybe you should get a better job." That was her handwriting. Sharp, precise, cold. I stared at that note for a long time. Then I grabbed my keys, went to work, and spent the whole shift replaying her words in my head. A better job. As if they were just lying around waiting for people like me. I'd been working since I was 16. Construction, deliveries, tech repairs, anything that paid. But the truth was, nothing I did ever seemed like enough for her. At night, I'd sit in the garage fixing busted laptops, eyes half open, fingers numb, trying to keep the lights on. Sometimes she'd come out there. She'd stand in the doorway, arms crossed. "Do you really think this is going to make us rich?" I'd keep typing, pretending I didn't hear the sarcasm. "It's not about being rich," I'd say quietly. "It's about building something." She'd roll her eyes. "You and your little projects. You're wasting your life." That word stuck. Wasting. She started going out more. "Dinner with friends," she'd say. "You wouldn't like it. They talk business." I never asked who was there. I just nodded. That's what broke men do. They nod. Our apartment felt like 2 separate worlds. Her side full of perfume and new clothes. Mine covered in wires, screens, and empty coffee cups. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at me like she was waiting for me to disappear. Then one night, I overheard her talking on the phone. I didn't mean to. I was just in the hallway. She said, "I can't keep living like this. He's sweet, but he's going nowhere." There was a pause, then a laugh. "No, he doesn't even notice." That laugh, that small, careless sound, hurt more than anything else. I walked outside, sat on the cold steps, and stared at the dark street. Cars passed, headlights sweeping over my hands. I thought about how people chase comfort until it blinds them. I thought about how I'd given her everything except success, and in her eyes, that was the only thing that mattered. The next morning, I tried to talk to her. "Laura," I said, "we can get through this. I've been working on a new idea, something real." She didn't even look up from her phone. "Ideas don't pay rent, Daniel. I just need more time." "You've had time," she said flatly. "You just don't have results." I didn't know it then, but that was the last real conversation we'd ever have, because a week later, I came home early, and that's when I found her suitcase by the door. Back then, before the bills, before the fights, before I learned how fast love can turn into disappointment, things were simple. I met Laura when we were both 23. I was fixing computers out of a friend's basement, and she worked at a coffee shop down the street. I used to stop by every morning just to see her smile. She'd write little notes on my cup. "Good luck today," or "Don't give up, dreamer." She called me that a lot. Dreamer. I thought it was a compliment. Maybe at first it was. We'd take long walks after her shift, sharing cheap takeout and talking about the future like it was something you could plan on paper. She said she wanted a big house with white walls and a kitchen full of sunlight. I told her I wanted to build something that outlived me. When you're young, those kinds of promises sound easy. Back then, I believed in effort. If you worked hard enough, you could make anything real. We got married a year later, a small ceremony in her aunt's backyard. We couldn't afford much, but it didn't matter. She wore a simple dress and laughed when the wind tried to take her veil. I remember thinking, this is it. This is happiness. Our first apartment was barely 600 square feet. You could hear the upstairs neighbors walking, the pipes groaning, the fridge humming louder than the TV, but it was ours. We'd eat dinner on the floor and talk about when, not if, things got better. At night, I'd sketch ideas for apps or websites, and she'd fall asleep beside me, her head on my shoulder. Every time I felt tired, I'd look at her and remember why I was doing all of it. We were a team, at least that's what I thought. Then life started pressing harder. Rent went up. My freelance clients disappeared one by one. The coffee shop closed, and suddenly those late-night dreams turned into late-night arguments. She started saying things like, "You said you'd make it." I'd say, "I'm still trying." Then she'd ask, "How long are we supposed to keep waiting?" It wasn't that she stopped loving me overnight. I think she just stopped believing I could win. There's a difference. I tried to remind her of the beginning, of those long walks, those small victories, the way she used to look at me like I was more than I really was. But memories don't pay for groceries. The day she sold her wedding ring to cover rent, I knew something was shifting. She said it didn't mean anything, that it was just a temporary sacrifice. But when she handed it over to the pawnshop clerk, I could see in her eyes that it wasn't temporary at all. That ring was more than jewelry. It was a promise, one that neither of us could afford anymore. After that, the distance between us grew faster. She stopped waiting up for me, stopped asking how my projects were going, stopped calling me dreamer. I think that's when I started working even harder. Not to succeed, but to prove I was still worth something. But love, built on proof, never lasts. Because one night, when I came home from another long shift, she wasn't waiting for me at all. Just a half-packed suitcase sitting by the door. The night I saw that half-packed suitcase, my heart sank. Laura was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at her phone like it was more important than what was left of us. "Going somewhere?" I asked quietly. She didn't look up. "Just packing some things. I need space." "Space from what?" She sighed, annoyed. "From this. From feeling stuck." I stood in the doorway, trying to find words that didn't sound desperate. "You know this isn't forever," I said. "I'm building something real. You just have to give it time." She put the phone down and finally looked at me. "Time? Daniel, I've given you 4 years. I can't keep living paycheck to paycheck while you build something that doesn't exist," I wanted to yell. Instead, I just sat down beside her and said, "I'll fix it. I'll make it work, whatever it takes." And I meant it. The next morning I sold my car. It wasn't worth much, an old Honda that coughed every time it started. but it covered 1 month's rent. I told Laura to quit her part-time job and rest a while. She didn't thank me. She just said, "That's not a long-term solution." She was right. But back then, love made me blind enough to think effort was the same thing as progress. I took every job I could find, daytime at the gas station, nights fixing computers, weekends doing freelance web design for small businesses that barely paid. I'd sleep 3 hours a night, live on cheap coffee and vending machine sandwiches. Laura would come home from seeing her friends, the ones who always had more, and say things like, "You look exhausted," or "This isn't healthy." But she never said thank you. She'd sit on the couch scrolling through social media, looking at pictures of people on vacations, people with nice clothes, people smiling. Then she'd look around our small apartment and shake her head like she'd lost a bet. Once, she said, "I didn't marry you to live like this." I didn't respond, because deep down, I wondered if she was right. I started saving every spare dollar to build my first proper app. It wasn't much, a scheduling tool for small businesses, but it worked. At night, when she slept, I'd code until my fingers cramped, watching tutorials on a secondhand laptop that overheated every 10 minutes. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at her while she slept, wondering when she stopped believing in me. I released the app 6 months later. It made a few $100s in the first month. To me, it was everything. To her, it was nothing. I showed her the sales on my screen, proud like a kid bringing home a good report card. She looked at it, then said, "That's it? That doesn't even cover groceries." I tried to explain it was just the beginning, that it could grow, but she was already putting on her coat. "Don't wait up," she said. She didn't tell me where she was going. I didn't ask. That became our routine. Me working, her leaving, silence filling the space between us. The few times we did talk, it always came back to money. She'd say, "You should get a real job." I'd say, "I have one. I'm just not paid for it yet." She'd laugh like I'd told the saddest joke in the world. I started noticing receipts in her purse from restaurants we could never afford, new perfume bottles, dresses I hadn't seen before. When I asked, she said, "A friend helped me out." Something about the way she said "friend" made my stomach turn, but I didn't push it. I was too focused on working harder, on fixing everything with success. One night, around 2 a.m., my laptop crashed and wiped out weeks of code. I remember staring at the blank screen, feeling everything inside me go quiet. Then I heard the front door close softly. She was leaving again. I didn't even get up. I just whispered to the empty room, "I'll make it. You'll see." I worked for 2 more months like that. No sleep, no life, no love. And when the exhaustion finally caught up to me, I passed out right there at my desk. That's how I ended up in the hospital. When I woke up in the hospital, the room smelled like bleach and stale air. My head was pounding. My hands were bandaged from where I'd hit the floor. A nurse told me I'd collapsed from exhaustion and dehydration. "How long was I out?" I asked. "Almost a day," she said. "You're lucky someone found you." Turns out it wasn't Laura. It was my landlord. He'd come to check why the rent hadn't been paid and found me unconscious. When I called Laura, she didn't answer. Not that night, not the next morning, not even the day after. I signed the discharge papers myself and took a bus home. The hallway felt empty before I even opened the door. Inside, half the furniture was gone. Her clothes, her mirror, the wedding photo that used to sit on the dresser, all gone. On the kitchen counter, there was an envelope. No "Dear Daniel," no apology, just a short note written in her neat, sharp handwriting. "I can't do this anymore. I need more than dreams." That was it. No signature, no goodbye. I stood there, reading it over and over until the words blurred. Then I sat on the floor and laughed, not because it was funny, but because there was nothing else left to do. That night, I slept on the empty bed frame. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just stared at the ceiling and listened to the quiet, realizing I was finally free and completely alone at the same time. A week later, a mutual friend called. He didn't know she'd left, so when he asked, "How's Laura?" I just said, "She's gone." He hesitated. "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you knew." "Knew what?" He sighed. "She's been seeing someone, for a while now. A guy she met through one of her work friends, owns a small real estate firm downtown." I didn't say a word. He added softly, "She said he gives her the kind of life she always wanted." I hung up. I didn't yell, didn't break anything, just walked out of the apartment, down to the old pier where I used to go when I needed to think. The water was calm that night. I watched the city lights reflect off it. The same lights I used to point at and say, "One day, I'll be up there." Now all I could think was how she'd never even given me the chance to get there. I stayed there until sunrise. When I finally went home, I opened my laptop. It was cracked from the fall, but it still turned on. The cursor blinked at me like it was waiting for a decision. That's when I made one. If she wanted someone successful, then fine, I'd become him. But not for her, for me. I sold what little I had left, my TV, the furniture, the tools I'd been using for repairs. I moved into my car, parked near the library so I could use the Wi-Fi during the day. Every morning, I'd wake up stiff, brush my teeth in a gas station sink, and code until my fingers hurt. Every night, I'd fall asleep staring out the windshield, promising myself that one day I'd make something she couldn't ignore. People like to talk about heartbreak like it's emotional, but it's not. It's practical. It's waking up hungry, broke, and realizing nobody's coming to save you, so I saved myself. I built version after version of my app, improved it, redesigned it, learned marketing from free online videos. I didn't have investors. I didn't have encouragement, but I had time and pain, and both of those can build things if you use them right. I lived in that car for almost 3 months, a beat-up silver sedan with one working window and a heater that barely worked. The seats smelled like old coffee and rain, but it was the only roof I could afford. In the mornings, I'd park behind a gym, sneak inside with a 7-day guest pass I kept reprinting online, and shower before heading to the library. By 9, I'd have my laptop plugged into an outlet, coding until closing time. The librarians knew me by name. One of them, an older man named Frank, used to slide me an extra sandwich from the staff fridge. I told him I was working on something big. He said, "Good. Big things start small." Most nights I slept in parking lots near 24-hour diners because they felt safer. I'd fall asleep watching streetlights flicker through the windshield, dreaming of nothing because dreams felt expensive. The app, the same one Laura used to call my little project, started to work. I'd built a prototype that helped small stores manage their orders and staff schedules. A few local shops started using it. They paid me in cash, not much, but enough to eat. One afternoon, while testing updates, my laptop battery died. When I plugged it into my car's outlet, it sparked and fried the charger. I remember sitting there in the driver's seat, holding that melted cord, realizing I couldn't afford another one. I just sat there for hours, staring at my reflection in the cracked screen, thinking maybe this was it. Maybe life had already decided how far I was allowed to go. That night, it rained so hard I couldn't sleep. Water leaked through the roof, dripping onto my shoulder. I was cold, hungry, and angry, not at Laura anymore, but at myself for letting everything collapse. Around midnight, I walked into the diner next to the parking lot. A waitress named Helen looked me over, then pointed at an empty booth. "Coffee?" she asked. "Just water," I said. She brought both anyway. "On the house," she said quietly. I hadn't realized until that moment how long it had been since someone had been kind for no reason. I stayed there all night, staring at the notepad I used to plan updates. At dawn, Helen came by with another cup and said, "Whatever you're working on, don't quit. I can tell you're close." I didn't know why, but I believed her. I pawned my watch, the only thing I had left from my father, and bought a new laptop charger. That same day, one of my app users emailed me asking if I'd consider licensing the system to another chain of stores. That was the first real break. A month later, I got a call from a small investor who'd found my app through a business forum. He said, "You've got something here, kid. Let's meet." I showed up to that meeting wearing the same wrinkled shirt I'd slept in, holding a folder of printouts. He didn't care. He just said, "You've got grit. That's rarer than talent." He wrote me a check that covered 6 months of development. I moved into a small studio, bought a real desk, and got back to work. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't surviving. I was building. I didn't post about it, didn't tell anyone. While other people celebrated fake lives online, I was too busy creating a real one. By the end of that year, the app had 10,000 users. A year after that, we got picked up by a major software distributor. The money came fast. So did the recognition. But the weird thing was, I didn't feel happy. Not yet. Because deep down, I knew who I was doing this for, and it wasn't me. The first time someone called me Mr. Harris, founder and CEO, I almost laughed. It didn't sound real. One day I was coding in my car. The next, I was signing contracts in glass offices overlooking the city I used to sleep under. But it wasn't luck. It was every sleepless night stacked on top of each other until something finally broke through. My startup, Synchrocore, grew faster than any of us expected. We weren't just helping small stores anymore. We were streamlining entire retail chains, cutting costs, tracking performance, automating systems people said couldn't be automated. I built a small team, just 5 people at first, all hungry, all broke like I'd been. We worked out of a basement with no windows and one coffee machine that broke every other day. But we believed. The day we hit 1 million active users, I didn't throw a party. I went back to that same diner, the one where Helen gave me free coffee when I had nothing. She still worked there. When she saw me, she smiled like no time had passed. "Looks like you made it," she said. "Not yet," I told her, "but I'm getting close." I left her a tip that covered her rent for the month. She cried. A few months later, I got invited to speak at a tech conference in New York. I almost didn't go. I hated public attention, but something told me it mattered. I walked onto that stage wearing a suit that actually fit this time. The lights were bright, but I wasn't nervous. I looked at the crowd and said, 5 years ago, I was fixing laptops out of my car. Today, that same car sits in my office lobby to remind me where I started. People stood and clapped. It felt surreal, like watching someone else's life from the outside. That's when the media started calling. Articles, interviews, podcasts, they all wanted to know how I did it. I always gave the same answer. Consistency, not talent, not luck, just consistency. A few months later, a national news network invited me to do a feature interview, the one that opened this story. They called it "The Man Who Refused to Quit." The night before the interview, I got a message, an unknown number. It said, "Congratulations, Daniel. I saw the news. You did what you always said you would." No name, but I didn't need one. It was Laura. For the first time in years, I stared at her name and didn't feel anger, just distance. She'd been gone long enough that she was no longer part of the version of me that had survived. Still, I couldn't help but wonder what her life looked like now. I didn't have to guess for long. The morning after the interview aired, one of my PR managers handed me a folder full of public feedback. Screenshots, comments, fan messages. At the top was a photo someone had taken, a grainy picture of a woman watching my interview on an old TV inside a small apartment. She was sitting on the floor, holding a mug, eyes locked on the screen. It was Laura. For a second, I didn't know what to feel. She'd once told me she couldn't live with my dreamer's life. Now she was living in the quiet aftermath of it, and watching the dream she'd walked away from become reality. Later that week, another message came from her. "I always knew you had potential. I'm proud of you." I stared at it for a while. Then I deleted it. It wasn't pride I needed from her. It was belief, and she gave that up the moment she walked out the door. Still, I didn't hate her. She was part of the reason I made it. The pain she caused had been fuel, ugly, exhausting fuel, but it got me through. And now, sitting in that TV studio years later, when the host asked if I thought about the people who left, I wasn't lying when I said every day. Not out of bitterness, out of gratitude. Because sometimes, the ones who break you are just teaching you how to rebuild yourself stronger. A few months after that interview, I got invited to an award ceremony in Los Angeles. They were honoring Innovators of the Decade. It sounded ridiculous to me. I'd spent most of the decade sleeping in cars and coffee-stained clothes, but I went anyway. The event was packed, cameras flashing, people shaking hands like it meant something. I wasn't used to that kind of attention, so I did what I always did, stood quietly near the edge of the room, taking it all in. Halfway through the night, I heard a voice behind me. "Daniel." It was faint, unsure, like she wasn't sure I'd turn around. But I knew it instantly. I turned. There she was. Laura. She looked older, not in a bad way, Drake, just real. The kind of real life gives you when it stops protecting you. Her hair was shorter, her eyes softer. She smiled, but there was hesitation in it. "I didn't think you'd recognize me," she said. "I did," I replied. We stood there for a second, two people who used to share everything and now had nothing to say. "You look good," she said finally. "So do you," I lied. She laughed a little. "I saw the interview. You've done well for yourself." "I've been lucky," I said. She shook her head. "No, you worked for it." I could see it in her eyes, the mix of pride, regret, and disbelief. She was remembering every night she'd told me I'd never make it. She glanced around the ballroom. You must be proud. I thought about it. I'm grateful, I said. Proud? Not really. It's just work. There was a pause, heavy and quiet. Then she said, I was wrong about you. I nodded. Yeah, you were. She swallowed hard, then looked at the floor. I didn't think you'd actually do it. I didn't respond. She finally looked back up. Do you hate me? I shook my head. No. You taught me what motivation really feels. Like, she gave a small, sad smile. That's fair. The host called my name from the stage. I looked at her one last time and said, Take care, Laura. Then I walked up to accept the award. When I turned around, she was gone. Just like the first time. But this time, it didn't hurt. Because this time, she walked away from someone who didn't need her anymore. A week later, I got another message from her. No begging, no apology, just a simple line. You made it. I replied once. I was always going to. That was the last time we ever spoke. Justice doesn't always come with shouting or revenge. Sometimes it's just peace. The kind that comes when you finally stop needing to prove anything. I didn't destroy her life. I didn't need to. Life already showed her what she lost. And that's enough. After that night, everything slowed down. For years, I'd lived like I was running from a ghost. Always chasing, always proving, always trying to outrun the echo of her laughter when she called me a failure. But when the applause faded and the awards collected dust, I realized something. I wasn't running anymore. My company had grown beyond me. Hundreds of employees, offices in multiple cities, partnerships overseas. People would stop me in public, thank me for giving them jobs, for changing their lives. And every time someone said that, I'd think back to the man who used to sleep in his car, the man no one believed in, and I'd whisper to myself, you changed your own first. Money can fix a lot of problems, but it can't fill silence. For a long time, my house felt too big. Wide halls, empty rooms, echoes instead of voices. I didn't mind the quiet, but I didn't want to die surrounded by it. So I started building something different. Not software, not a company, a life. I opened a mentorship program for young developers who came from nothing, kids who reminded me of myself. We paid their rent, gave them laptops, and taught them how to build things that mattered. Watching them grow felt better than any paycheck I'd ever earned. One afternoon, one of those kids, a quiet 19-year-old named Malik, came to my office and said, Sir, how do you know when you've made it? I thought about it for a while, then said, When you don't need to hear it from anyone else. He smiled. So you've made it, huh? I laughed. Took me a while. A few months later, a local university invited me to speak at their graduation. I almost turned it down, but something told me to go. When I got to the podium, the crowd looked like a sea of faces full of possibility. I told them, success isn't revenge, it's peace. If you're chasing it to prove someone wrong, you'll never stop running. But if you chase it to become who you were meant to be, you'll never lose. After the ceremony, a woman in her 60s came up to me with tears in her eyes. She said, My son's been living out of his car. He watches your interviews. You give him hope. I just nodded and said, Tell him not to quit. I've been where he is. Driving home that night, the city lights didn't look the same anymore. They weren't the symbols of what I didn't have. They were reminders of what I survived, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. Not to the people who doubted me, not to the ones who left, not even to the version of myself that used to beg for validation. I had peace, real, quiet peace, the kind you don't post about, the kind no one can take away. People ask me sometimes if I ever wanted to see her again, to show her the house, the cars, the offices with my name on the door. I tell them no, because if I ever saw her again, I wouldn't want her to see what I have. I'd want her to see who I became. Back then, I thought losing her was the end of my life. But looking back now, it was just the end of a chapter that was holding me back from who I was supposed to be. I don't hate her. I don't blame her anymore. We all make choices. Hers just came with a lesson I needed. You learn a lot about people when you're broke. You learn who claps when you're trying, not when you're winning. You learn who stays when there's nothing left to take. And most of all, you learn that silence, real silence, is sometimes better than fake love. These days I wake up early. I still make my own coffee. I still write code sometimes, not because I need to, but because it reminds me of who I was when no one believed in me. Sometimes I drive past that old apartment, the one with the flickering hallway light and the broken mailbox. It's still there, smaller than I remember. But I don't feel sad anymore. I just smile and whisper, "You did it." Not because I became rich, because I became free. People think success is about money or power. It's not. It's about peace. The kind that comes when you finally stop needing permission to be proud of yourself. If I've learned anything, it's this. The world doesn't owe you belief. Sometimes you have to build it yourself. And if someone leaves you when you're at your lowest, don't chase them. Thank them, because they just made room for the version of you that will rise. If this story made you feel something, share it. Some endings aren't losses, they're directions. Thanks for listening.